High achievers. What I've found is most high achievers, people who are CEOs, entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, people who've achieved status or great success in their career, in what they do to make a living, have a downside, have a hidden shadow within them that has been quietly lurking and usually shows itself in some type of a wake-up call. And that is they've lost their sense of aliveness. They've lost their joy, their passion, their contentment without the career, without the status of being a entrepreneur, CEO, lawyer, doctor, or whatever is caught up with their work. Their work is their identity. It's where they derive their sense of meaning and purpose. But outside of that, they're dull inside. And it shows through their relationships, through their friendships, through their intimacy with their partner. And what I've noticed when high achievers come to see me, they come to see me for an initial issue, whether it is they're overstressed, they're burnt out, they're having problems sleeping, or whatever it is. But the underlying issue, what's really behind that, is they have disconnected and now they don't know how to reconnect with others. They've lost their aliveness within them. Aliveness is like a life force that's within you, within all of us, and it doesn't need things to exist. It doesn't need a status symbol in order for it to be present. These statuses, these achievements are expressions of our creativity, our aliveness, our intelligence, our drive, our passion. But when we depend on those things to drive aliveness from it, everything else tends to suffer. And I found that when working with high achievers, their sense of inner contentment, their aliveness is lacking outside of what they do. And the more they get into what they do, the more they get into that or focused on their work, which becomes who they are, the more their relationships suffer, the more they're like a shell of them. Because relationships, because people are uncomfortable, because facing themselves is uncomfortable. They can't control it, but they can control their work. They've mastered the art of what they do. That's predictable, that's safe. But relationships are unsafe. People are unsafe. And so they've learned to disconnect, disassociate themselves from having meaningful connections, meaningful relationships, of having that sense of aliveness, and it suffers because you can't suppress one aspect of you without it affecting others. So here's my example. A family came to see me years ago when I was working with families, and a doctor, the husband was a doctor, and he was having issues with his teenage son. His teenage son was doing things that some were ordinary, but other behaviors were quite concerning. He didn't know where it was coming from. And, they were a very wealthy couple, and he stated he had given so much to his son already. And of course, they have expectations of him. And so there was disappointment, there was shame, there was anger, there was frustration. And he couldn't understand why his son was acting out in the ways he was, in what he was doing. Eventually, when I met with him alone, it became clear. Here was a man who was already struggling with issues within him, but med school achievement became a way to hide those struggles. It became a way to deal with those struggles. Through success, he could feel good about himself. Through achievement and accomplishment, he could feel that sense of worthiness, that sense of aliveness. The problem is med school also reinforced the idea of disassociating. The it's the training they put them through is almost being like in the army. The sleep deprivation, the long hours, and just being a doctor and disassociating oneself from your patients or from what's happening, and keeping a clear objective eye helps doctors navigate the reality of dealing with pretty intense things that most people couldn't deal with without them being emotionally affected by it. And so this dissociation, this disconnection, this numbness transferred into his relationships. The connection between him and his wife began to suffer. His wife basically blurted out in a session, "We don't even have sex anymore." And, the son wasn't there in that session, but it's like that was just bubbling up in her chest. And the father was quiet and looked down. And it was clear that he had lost his connection to his family, to his son, to his wife, and he had thrown himself into work and took on the identity because that's where he felt safe. That's where he felt the respect that he longed for, the status. That's what gave him that sense of predictability. But underneath that were beliefs and emotions that he hadn't dealt with, that were coming up in his family. And like I said, if you numb any area of your life, you're going to numb that sense of aliveness, because he was really looking for that sense of aliveness. And deep down inside, work wasn't doing that for him anymore. Because like I said, once you numb that, everything else gets affected. And so after working with him to realize, well, you're not really here about the behaviors with your son. You're actually here to restore your aliveness. It's about you. It's about learning to feel safe enough to open up and to stop the dissociating and the disconnection and the numbing. And as he began to work on that and face that, his son's behaviors started to stop. Negative behavior started to stop. The lines of communication began to open between him and his wife. And I'll tell you that how many other high achievers out there are dealing with the same thing, but they don't have a son to bring them into coaching or bring them into counseling, right? They may send their son off to boarding school or whatever, thinking it's the son's problem. He just has to get it together, and not taking the time to self-reflect and see that no, it's actually you. It's actually your energy. Your sense of aliveness and connection has been lost because you have identified yourself with what you do, and you have numbed yourself out. You have disassociated yourself from you, from your own self, from your feelings about how you feel deep inside you and with others. And therefore, you're walking around like a shell of yourself, unhappy, unfulfilled, lacking meaning. And it can be hard as a high achiever when you're chasing the next fix, you're chasing the next status, you're chasing the next symbol that you think is going to bring you that sense of aliveness. And when you get it, it doesn't. That can drive a lot of people to do other things, more extreme things, or get into patterns of addiction or more ways to dissociate themselves so they can get that fix, because you're after that natural feeling of aliveness again, of being you, of connecting to your life force, of connecting to meaning, purpose, the inner contentment, the deep connections that are fulfilling. And in order to do that, you've got to face those realities that you don't want to face. You've got to admit these things to yourself. The good news is, as you do that, as you start to have that intention and you reach out for that support, in whatever way that is, you'll find that the symptoms that you were dealing with, whatever they are, were just that, symptoms showing you where you need to go, what you need to look at, how you've been disconnecting yourself, why you've been disassociating and disconnecting yourself, why you don't let yourself get connected and close to people. I have another example. A partner of mine, when I was younger, her dad was extremely successful. He had a multi-million-dollar company that he built from scratch, and he was driven. He was happy that he came to the country, and he was able to get to build a better life for his family. But his family, his wife, his sons, his daughters, what I noticed is the same theme was running through that entire family, and that was disconnection. That there was a surface level happening of people getting along or people communicating, but there was a lack of true connection. There was a longing of true connection, and he was keeping everybody at a distance. His energy was of more about protecting himself, numbing himself, and throwing himself in work. And as a result, something similar was happening. There was a lot of dysfunction happening with the siblings. There was a lot of disconnection there. There was a feeling of emptiness and a lack of a loving presence. And of course, being younger, I saw it, and I was able to articulate it to myself, but I knew it was not my place to tell him that. And they would not have been receptive to it. But that experience taught me early on what happens to high achievers, what happens to people who throw themselves into their work, into their success, claim that identity, and dissociate themselves from others and from their own feelings and from who they are, because that makes them feel safe. That gives them a sense of control over their environment. And the mind thrives off of safety, off of predictability. The nervous system needs that in order to grow, to blossom. And unfortunately, the very thing that the nervous system is doing to try to protect itself is the very thing that's making things worse at times. So I get it, there's a positive intention behind that. There's a search for protection, for safety, for peace, for aliveness. But over time, that job, that symbol, that status symbol, that position starts to rust. It starts to lose its flavor. It starts to dull as well. And pretty soon, you'll find that over time, high achievers lose their drive even for what they once had a drive for. It doesn't give them that same high that they were chasing, that same joy, that same passion. And they're running from that as well. So they become a shell of themselves, and they don't know why they're unhappy. So I know this was a lot, but I hope this was inspiring and enlightening for you. If you are a high achiever and you're listening and this resonated with you, it's important that you know that what's happening to you can be shifted, can be turned around. It will take a sense of honesty and courage and commitment to a new way of being. But you'll find that new way of being restores a deep sense of aliveness within you. And that aliveness will spread to your relationships. It'll resurrect your relationships. And at best it could even rework them, make you set boundaries, make you change relationships, make you discover what you really want, make you discover your purpose, make you discover things that you were hiding from yourself that you thought you wanted. These things all bubble and come to the surface because that energy of aliveness wants expression. It's the life force. It's where we get our joy from, our natural passion, our contentment, our spark. It's the spark that's within us for life, for meaning, for expression, for joy, for connection, for love. And if that is suppressed, then everything else will become suppressed too. But you can never lose your spark. You can only dim it and suppress it. So I'm someone that helps you to find that spark and to express that. I'm someone that helps you to go past the symptoms of what you're experiencing, reach deep and get real transformation that continues to spread throughout all areas of your life. If this is something that resonated with you, book a call. I work with high achievers just like you who are ready to dig deep and win big in life and with the connection with themselves so they can feel that sense of aliveness again. So the question you should be asking yourself is, whatever you're doing, however you're being, does this bring me a sense of aliveness? Another question is, what happened to aliveness here in your connection with your partner, your children, with yourself, with your friends, with life itself? What happened to the sense of aliveness? What am I doing to take me away from that? These are questions to ask yourself and to help you see exactly what patterns you were unconsciously creating that were blocking that. All right, so write those down, take time, answer it honestly. And then when you're ready, book a call, book a consultation with me, and I'll get you started. I'll get you on your way to another path.